Welcome to Brookline Booksmith's author event series. Just a few housekeeping notes. Thank you for keeping your phones on silent. There will be time for a Q&A, so get your questions ready, but please raise your hands and our moderator will call on you. If you haven't yet picked up your pre-order book or you'd like to buy a book, you can do so at the desk over there after the event. And of course, we are here tonight to celebrate the release of The Mother Code with author Ruthie Ackerman in conversation with Cloe Axelson, senior editor of Cognoscenti at WBUR. Ruthie Ackerman's writing has been published in Vogue, Glamour, O Magazine, The New York Times, The Atlantic, The Journal, and among many others. She launched the Ignite Writers Conference Collective in 2019 and has since worked with hundreds of authors to publish their own stories. Ruthie has a master's degree in journalism from New York University and lives in Brooklyn with her family. The Mother Code is a propulsive memoir that blends history, science, and cultural criticism to uncover whether motherhood outside of society's rigid rules and expectations is possible, and whether Ruthie fits the mold for what a mother should be. Here to tell us more are Cloe Axelson and Ruthie Ackerman.
Well, hello everybody. Can everybody hear me? Okay, good.
Hello.
There she's on. We're mic'd. So I am really excited to be here tonight. I am a full-time working mom. Ruthie and I are about the same vintage. And all three of my kids are a result of IVF. So we have some things in common, some things to talk about. And I don't know how many of you have read the book. Can I get a show of hands of folks who've already read the book? Okay. Advanced. So then you know it's just a really interesting combination of memoir and cultural criticism and narrative nonfiction reporting. And it's also just a really intimate and honest journey of self-discovery in like the most wonderful way. And it tackles some very universal themes, regardless of whether you have experienced fertility issues or not, around family history and managing uncertainty and the relentlessness of father time, which I think we can all relate to in some way, and the chaos of the universe too. And so I'm hoping in the next 45 minutes or so we can give you a flavor of all those things in the book. And I have some questions, and Ruthie's gonna read a little bit, and then we'll leave some time at the end to take questions from all of you. So here we go. Okay, so first question. Can you tell us about the title?
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. I feel like this is I live in Brooklyn, but this feels like my kind of hometown event, like launch event, because I went to college at Boston University and a bunch of my friends are here from college and
Go Terriers.
Exactly. But the Mother Code. So the title came from the fact that I thought that there was a flaw in my genetic code that would make it so that I should maybe not have children at all. And so when I was trying to decide whether or not to have a baby to become a mother, I was thinking about a few things. One, was becoming a mother something that I deeply desired, or was it something that society told me I should desire? And how would I kind of untangle those things? And then the other things I was thinking about was our kind of maternal line and family history. And so the stories and mythologies I'd heard about my great-grandmother and my grandmother, and how much of that was genetic in some way. And I also have a half-brother who I call Adam in the book, who has, I say, a triple whammy of rare genetic disorders. And so those things were kind of hovering in my mind as I thought about this kind of path to motherhood or not. And so the Mother Code was really describing that flaw that I thought existed in my genetic code. And I don't know if you want me to talk about what it came to mean, but I'm happy to do that now.
Yeah, please, by all means.
So as I kind of go through my journey, I hate that word, but okay, my hero's journey, The mother code came to mean to me the idea that we all have our own very personal mother code stories, whether or not we become mothers. And that that mother code story is like makes up every shade of gray, because we're told by society that there's this binary when it comes to womanhood and motherhood. There's kind of the trad wife or Brady Bunch version of motherhood, and then on the other side is the sort of childless cat ladies, and there's nothing in between. But my big takeaway from writing the book was actually that there's every shade in between, and that each one of us has our very unique mother code story. So it wasn't, the mother code wasn't about a flaw internally, it was really about a flaw externally in society that makes us think that we each can't have our own personal unique story.
A big theme of the book is maternal ambivalence, and the notion that through writing the book and through your own experience, you come to realize that actually maternal ambivalence is like kind of the norm in some sense, but nobody talks about that. So can you tell us the story of, I mean, in your 20s, you did a lot of traveling and adventuring. You were setting out your own path. You made a pact with maybe some of your college buddies who are here tonight about never ever having kids, never. And then one day, that changed for you. So can you tell me about that, when you first sort of had an inkling that actually, maybe I want to be a mom after all?
So this has been the difficult part of both writing the book and also talking about the book, because there wasn't this really clear aha moment. I talk in the book, there's a scene where I go talk to my therapist and she says, on a scale of 0 to 100, how badly do you want to have a kid? And I said, I just blurted it out without thinking, 55%. And that sounded like not enough. Because if I was going to annihilate my dreams, annihilate my identity, all the things that we hear about when we become mothers, I thought I better want it like 99% at least. And so I was like, I can't believe I just told her 55%. And she said to me, well, why isn't that enough? Why do you think it has to be more? Why is you're leaning towards yes, and why can't you listen to those deepest desires? And a lot of the book is about how I came to finally start, and it's an ongoing process, you guys. This is not like, oh, now I figured it all out. But yeah, how I've started to try to listen to those desires more.
Yeah. So there's a scene that you describe in the book where you basically consider purchasing a syringe and impregnating yourself with your then husband's sperm without his knowledge. Mm-hmm. And your ex-husband didn't want to have children, but you sort of were moving in that direction. And I heard you say in an interview, I think it was with Juana Summers on All Things Considered, that story wasn't initially included in the book, but that your best friend, who maybe she's here, I don't know, said you got.
Right now I want to kill her.
sorry Ruthie, and sorry Lisa. But said
let's
that
call her out.
Okay, Lisa, you're in big trouble. There she is. Okay. Can you tell us about that? I think it speaks to like a level of urgency that can almost only be explained in that story. Can you?
Yes. So I was not going to put that in the book, because who wants to put their worst moment into a book for everyone to judge? But I did put it in the book because, as Lisa told me, that that moment of buying that syringe, I did not use the syringe, but the wanting to use it, and that sort of desperation in that moment of like, really wanting to save my marriage, really wanting to not be in this position to have to upend my entire life, especially for that, because I only knew that I wanted a baby 55%. I was going to upend my entire life in order to leave my first husband and try to become a mother. And at that point I was I was almost 38 years old. And so there was no guarantee that I'd be able to have a child when I was ready, or that I would find a partner to do it with. And I was very certain at that moment in time that I wanted to find a partner. And so in my desperation, I went and bought a syringe and was planning to use it. Funny story about that is that when you publish a book at a place like Random House, you go through a very extensive legal read. And my very sweet lawyer, in his probably mid to late 60s, Jewish guy, really I could feel the connection between us. And he's like, can you explain to me how you were planning on using the syringe?
That's quite a fact check. Oh dear.
And I was like, and he wanted details. So, and then I hope no one, it was one line in the book, I hope no one would ever mention it. Everybody mentions the syringe.
Sorry, blame Juana. She
Juana's
brought it
fault.
up. I was like, well, if she's talking about this at NPR, she could talk about it in Brookline. Right?
Totally.
Can I have you read a little bit? Would that be okay? Okay. So I've selected 3 different things that I hope we'll have time for Ruthie to read, and from different parts of the book. So this is from chapter 9, and you're recently divorced. Some of your friends are saying, well, why don't you just have a kid on your own? And yeah.
Spoiler alert, that marriage did not work out. That first one, syringe guy. Okay, here I go. I knew I could be a solo parent. I could go to a sperm bank, pick a man who on paper I'd love to date, and have a doctor knock me up. My feminist belief system told me that I should want to have a baby on my own, or at least I should think it was feasible. And it was feasible, but I didn't want to. And that made me feel even more ashamed. Why was I convinced I needed a man to have a family? The obvious answer is that traditionally the man has been the provider. But I was lucky. I could afford a baby on my own as long as I was careful about my spending. No more $18 cocktails and $5 lattes. No more tasting menus and designer sample sales. That's not what I wanted, though. I was searching for a teammate, someone who would help me to finally feel like I was on the inside, next to the warm fire, instead of standing outside in the cold, looking in. Yes, I wanted a child, but I wanted a partner just as much. Eventually, I signed myself up for a rest and relaxation weekend at a New Age retreat center in upstate New York. Can anyone guess which one? Omega. I love how everyone's like, Omega, obviously. My first day there, a 6'2" Swedish massage therapist gave me a massage in a dim room surrounded by crystals. Before I took off my robe, he asked me what I wanted to let go of. I need to know if I should have a baby on my own, I said. The words came tumbling out. He motioned for me to lie down, and as I did, he said, let's see what your body says. As he kneaded the muscles in my back gently, I cried. It felt good to have someone's hands on me. It felt good to let all my pent-up tears out. It felt good to exhale. What about the baby? I asked him after he was finished. I'd poked and prodded every inch of my mind and couldn't find a satisfying answer to my question about whether I should do this whole motherhood thing on my own. I read every book, asked my friends, I'd even spoken to women I barely knew to see if they could help me decide. But everyone told me I'd just know. Instead of words of wisdom, my monsieur brought me a warm cup of tea, which was kind but far from satisfying. Only you know the answer to the baby question, he said, clearly not knowing what to say. He was a massage therapist, not a therapist. More than that, he was a stranger. How was he supposed to know what to do? I knew nothing about his life, just as he knew little about mine.
Thank you. So I selected that passage because I think it's an early example of when you, Ruthie, like your character in your memoir, you don't trust yourself. You second guess yourself. You look for everyone but you for answers to some of your biggest questions. And I sensed in your writing a real need to just very earnestly quell uncertainty, like get some answers. And so I'm wondering if in your process of writing this book, has your relationship to uncertainty changed?
Ooh, it's such a good question. I really want to say yes. I really want to say yes. I've gotten better. I think that's partially from writing this book. I think it's partially with age. Maybe there's more uncertainty as we age or we recognize it more. And so, yeah, it definitely has changed. Also, I'm in a very different place in my life. I now have a daughter, spoiler alert, who's here, Clementine, and my husband, Rob. And so it's a constant conversation and a constant negotiation to help me think about uncertainty. So I guess I would say it's a daily practice.
That's fair. That's very fair. I think it is for many of us. So shortly, I'm sort of moving chronologically through the book, and hopefully that gives you a taste for everything. So shortly after your divorce, you get together with a man in the book you call Daniel. And you can pretty quickly see yourself marrying him and having a child with him. And then he dies by suicide. And you're devastated, understandably. As a reader, it was like a gut punch. I just did not see it coming, like, at all. And I'm wondering if you can talk about that time in your life and how that tragic thing that seems kind of like apart from the life that you've built now is part of that broader story.
So this is another story that was not going to be in the book. I did not want it to be in the book. It happened 9 years ago. It felt to me like it takes the book in a totally different direction. But actually, Rob was the one who said, it's really hard for a reader to understand my mental state at that moment in time when I met Rob without knowing about that situation with Daniel, without knowing where I was in that moment. And the sort of ghosts that both Rob and I were bringing to the relationship. So there was the ghost of my divorce, so my first husband. There was the literal ghost of Daniel. And then there was the ghost of Rob's ex-wife as well. And so we were bringing all these ghosts, and also the freshness, I don't know if freshness is the word, but like how fresh the trauma was from Daniel, because I met Rob 6 months after Daniel died. And I talk in the book about trying to go on these dates, and because the truth is, and I think this is something we talked about, if I had all the time in the world, I would have probably stopped and not continued dating at that point. I would have let myself grieve. But the whole point of this book is that I didn't have all the time in the world. I felt up against a wall biologically. At that point, Daniel died 3 days before my 39th birthday. And I thought, I need to find a partner right now. And so I was going on these dates, and I say this in the book, but I was like sipping my glass of wine, and like my lip was trembling. I was like crying as I was on these dates. And it's really hard to understand that sort of mental state I was in unless you know that story. But I was really careful about how much to tell, because I didn't want it to kind of derail the book, because that could be its own book.
As you were saying that, a sort of oddly a funny image came to mind, which is Marissa Tomei in My Cousin Vinny saying, "My biological clock is dead." Anybody? Okay, no, My Cousin Vinny fans out there.
I love when she says, "You don't blend," or "You blend."
You blend.
Yeah, you blend.
Hilarious. So funny. She is funny. So we've met you now. Thank you. You've introduced Rob for me, which was my sort of the next stop on the journey here. And you all have a really nice connection, but you're both recently divorced, and you're like, my biological clock is ticking, I want a baby, and he's like, maybe, but can we pump the brakes? But ultimately, you decide to move forward, and then you begin a very like a long journey into like the world of the fertility labyrinth. And I wonder if you can talk to us a little bit more about that journey, and then also comment on a phrase you've used, the fertility wealth gap, and kind of what that means.
Yeah. So Rob and I met, and in an ideal world, I was 39, he was a few years younger. We're both out of these marriages. And in an ideal world, we would have had a few years to get to know each other. We would have met each other's families. We would have traveled. We would have done all this stuff to figure out if we were right for each other, if we wanted to have a kid together. And he kept saying that, which sounded very sane, but at the same time I was like, I don't have that much time to figure this out. Let's just do this thing. Don't people just do it? I say in the book something like, stop futzing and start fucking.
I think that's a direct quote.
Yeah, that's a direct quote. Someone said I should make a t-shirt that says that.
For fertility clinics everywhere. Such sterile environments. Put those t-shirts up. Perfect.
That's how I'm going to become rich. So I don't know. We were on different timelines, but I also say, like, in an ideal world, I would have been on the same timeline as Rob. Like, I wanted to travel. I wanted to do all kinds of cool stuff. I wanted to take our time to get to know each other. And then finally, we, after much fussing, we came to an agreement. We'd go to the fertility clinic. And one thing we haven't talked about is that I had frozen my eggs when I was 35. And with the idea, actually, at the time, that yes, fertility preservation, that was like a nice kind of benefit of, I thought, of freezing my eggs, but actually it was to freeze time, because I was trying to figure out if my first marriage was gonna work or not, and I was desperately trying to save it, as I already told you. So I had frozen my eggs when I was 35, and Rob and I took those eggs to the clinic, and I was 41 at the time, and we thawed them. And when we thawed them, come to find out that none of them were viable. And I was crushed because
you spent a lot of money. Like
a lot of money.
$15,000 or something.
$15,000 to freeze them, but then there was the $1,200 a year to store them. The thawing and all of the stuff that comes with the thawing was another almost $11,000. I wrote an article about this in the Wall Street Journal recently because it ended up being like almost $34,000 total. And it was basically like, I might as well have like thrown it out the window. And one of my big questions, which I talk about in the book, but also in the Wall Street Journal article, is why does it fall on young women to pay? We already know women make less money than men, don't get as many promotions, all the stuff we know. We spend more on, tampon tax and beauty products and all this stuff. And then we're expected to pay for fertility preservation, although it benefits everybody if we wait to have children. Not too long, but longer.
Yeah.
And so that's the fertility wealth gap piece. But yeah, none of my eggs were viable. And then at that point, I was 41 years old and we had to make the decision about whether or not we'd try IVF with my own eggs, which at that point was like a less than 10% chance of being able to have a baby with my own eggs. But we tried twice anyway, just because it was like, we didn't know what else to do at that point.
Yeah. And then ultimately you are faced with a choice. So you do 2 rounds of IVF, and those rounds they fail. And then your doctor says, the doctor you were working with at the time says, you're like, well, what do we do? And he says, well, we could just do it again. And you're like, but there's only a 10% chance. So there's a whole sequence in the book where Ruthie goes and interviews other doctors, basically. And the gentleman that Dr. Safran, is it? No,
Sasson.
Sasson, excuse me. Okay, so Dr. Sasson ends up saying, well, you could do another round of IVF, but you could also consider using a donor egg. using a donor egg would be 65% more like, you'd be 65% likely to be able to conceive and have a baby.
Yeah.
And, but that's a hard choice because it means that your baby won't have your genetic material, right? And it means your child might not look like you. It means a whole number of things. So I'd love you to read this other passage. So this is when Ruthie gets on the phone with Siddhartha Mukherjee, who is an author and a biologist and a professor at Columbia and like a genius. And
Very, very cute, if you've ever seen a
also
picture.
adorable. I did Google him today. And Ruthie wanted him to help her understand the science behind her body's impact on her future baby if she was not the genetic material. Yeah.
Okay. Hi, I said nervously, wishing I had never called him. But there he was, so I forced myself to tell him my dilemma. Our doctor recommended we use donor eggs, and I wanted to know if that would mean that my body would just be a vessel for a growing baby, or if I'd have any imprint on our child at all. Siddhartha didn't laugh at my question or make me feel stupid for asking it. He was real with me. I think we don't understand enough about epigenetics to know the answer, he said. It was a fair response, but still, I wanted someone to say to me, if you choose this path, here is what will happen. Maybe there was a diagram he could show me or a mathematical model that would explain all the ways my cells would mix and mingle with our fetus's genetic code to modify its DNA. Instead of a diagram, Siddhartha offered a music analogy. Just like when a score of a symphony is written, a musician could choose to play section 1 or section 7 at different paces, and in doing so would change the way the music is heard. I nodded. With a partner who's a drummer, Rob's a drummer by the way, I'd heard enough about music over the past few years to understand that this was the perfect analogy. My body would be the musician, Siddhartha said. My womb wouldn't be able to change the notes of our fetus's DNA, but it could change the expression of how those notes were played. Played staccato or short, certain genes would be turned on. Played legato or long, others would be turned off. Played pianissimo or very quietly, a certain gene may be less pronounced. Played fortissimo or very loud, that same gene may be more pronounced. My body would decide. But I still didn't know what that meant in a tangible way. Would my body turn on a gene that made our baby's hands look like my mother's and mine? Would my body flip the switch so our baby's sense of humor mirrored my own? How would changing the way genes are expressed change who our baby would become? I finally got up the nerve to ask my question. I know it's impossible to do an experiment like this in humans, but what I really want to know is if we put the same embryo into 2 different women, whether the resulting children would be clones of each other. I paused, waiting to see his reaction. Would the babies be exactly the same? I saw my question register on Siddhartha's face, and I could tell he was taking it seriously. But I also knew I was asking an emotional question, and he was searching for a scientific answer. I wondered if the 2 could be compatible. We know the answer to that to some extent, was his reply. We do? The one thing we do know is that metabolic conditions in the mother affect the fetus strongly. He said, in 2 different metabolic environments, the fetus would be very different. So if one of these hypothetical mothers was using alcohol or one of the many drugs that cross the placental barrier, it would impact the fetus. What we don't know, and what the psychiatric literature is full of, is whether psychological or mental states are passed down from mother to fetus too. I wrote down in my notebook, don't use alcohol or drugs while pregnant.
Thank you. Thank you. So can you walk us through a little bit more of how you and Rob together made the decision to move forward with a donor?
Yeah, so we knew that we had a limited amount of savings, and we could try one more time IVF with my own eggs, and it would cost another $25,000, and if it didn't work, it would be like throwing it out a window. We would not have another chance, and we had already said it was less than a 10% chance of it working. And then there was this sort of like, I don't know, carrot of the donor egg, which was a 65% chance of success. It would cost twice as much, $50,000, or at the time we thought it was gonna be less, but anyway, ultimately it was like almost $50,000. But the clinic we went to had a money back guarantee program, which I thought sounded like horrific, like a Black Friday sale, like, buy one, get one, or whatever. But if it didn't work, we get our money back. So it was worth a try. We went and talked to them, and we ultimately decided to go in that direction, but more because it's a numbers game, right? So if we wanted to have a baby, and at the end of the day, we did at that point, then this was the way to go. But that didn't quell the anxiety and quell the questions.
Yeah. I think what was interesting to read was watching you puzzle out questions about is DNA destiny, and is the narrative passed on to you by your family, your grandmother, your great-grandmother? Are those things sort of yours to inherit, or ultimately can you create your own narrative? So can you, what do you think about that?
Yeah, so I also teach writing, so I feel like this is a good example to use here. That one of the things I say to the writers that I work with is that every book, essay, whatever you're writing, has to have a question at the center. And so the question at the center for me was both should I have a child? But also the question you're now asking, which is, was there a way to get out from under what I thought of as the family curse, in order to have a child that I wouldn't pass down any of the things from my own family, or that I wouldn't be a bad mother in some way. I would be a good mother.
Maybe you should mention, or we didn't mention this, but what the history was with your grandmother.
Yes. So the first line of my book is, I come from a long line of women who have abandoned their children, or who abandoned their children. Or at least that's what I've been told. And so the question is, would I abandon my child too, or my children too? And the other thing I talk about in my classes is the big lie. Every story has a big lie at the center. And so what happened is that I wanted to unravel, were my grandmother and my great-grandmother, were they really bad mothers? Did they really abandon their children? Or was it just the time they were born into, and sort of the limits of society and stuff like that? And therefore, there wouldn't be a flaw in my genetic code, and I could safely go ahead and have a baby. And what I discovered, I hired a research assistant, and we dug through census records, marriage and death records, and divorce records, all the kind of anything you can imagine. And what I discovered, first about Kitty, who's my great-grandmother, was that she came here in 1906 and through Ellis Island from Belarus, and that she never went to school after 6 years old. She only knew Yiddish. And the kind of family mythology was that she was married 25 times. And I actually found, because I was always like, that is the most ridiculous story I've ever heard. That's there's no way she was married 25 times. I found records for 14 marriages, which is still pretty good. It's a lot. One was 10 days, so I mean, she was moving fast. So, but the thing that really struck me about kind of unraveling the family mythologies, and I feel like we all have family mythologies, this is like one of the universals of the story, was that Kitty, like the lore that I held on to was that she was a gold digger, this is what I've been told, that she married all these men for money. But what I came to figure out, or at least this is what I believe from looking at all these records, is that she was looking for citizenship. She was a Jewish woman in the 1930s. She had 2 children. Her husband did not have citizenship either. It was a time in this country, much like today, where it was not safe to be an immigrant and especially to be Jewish immigrant, and that there were certain laws, and I'm not an expert in immigration, but where if you didn't know English and you weren't a citizen, there was the threat of deportation, or worse.
Familiar.
Exactly. And so my thought is that she was marrying different men looking for citizenship or hoping to get citizenship. And one of the stories that really sticks with me is a newspaper article I found. I feel like this is there's like classified ads, I guess, back in the day when you were getting divorced. You would have to tell why you were getting divorced in the newspaper, kind of like when you're like
explain it.
Yeah, pretty much. So I found this newspaper article. It's in the book, where her husband Harry, that she married 10 days. He said that she nagged and nagged and nagged him all day, and then her countersuit said that she wanted $200 to bring her son to live with them, so basically to support her child. And so through things like that, those little whispers of information, as well as the fact that I found census records that showed that basically the entire family was living with Kitty and her husband Irving. Her parents were living with them, her siblings, and so it just led me to believe there was more to the story. I don't know what the truth was. I also say she wasn't winning any Mother of the Year awards, let's be clear. But there was more to the story than what I'd been told, and therefore there could be more to my story.
Right. Can I ask you a few craft questions?
Yeah,
I bet there's some writers here who might appreciate it. So I read the acknowledgments, of course. It's like the best.
I read that first.
Yeah, you get that, me too. And I noticed that this line is included in your thank you to Carrie Fry. It says, "Thank you for responding to my emergency emails." That's in quotes. Telling you I was stuck. I couldn't move forward. I had no idea what this book was or what it was supposed to be. So can you, I mean, you were a journalist for many years, writing mostly shorter form, I imagine.
Yeah.
How did you make the leap to a book? And then how the heck did you do it?
I think it's one of these things, I was telling Cloe yesterday that I did a storytelling thing at Joe's Pub last night.
In New York?
In New York City, and standing up for 7 minutes to tell a story. And I'm a writer, so I'm used to being by myself in a room, not in front of a bunch of people.
You're doing great.
Thank you. So, and then when I got up there, I'm like, why the fuck did I do this? Why am I up here? And then that's kind of what writing a book is like. I think you don't know enough, so you think it sounds like a good idea, and then you start doing it, and then you're like, well, and now I'm doing it, so I have to finish, and you just keep going. And then the people that write books are the people that keep going. It's not necessarily about talent or any of those things. It's just, you just keep going. But I wrote the entire book and then said to Carrie was my outside editor, and Jamia, who is at Random House, she was my editor at Random House. And I told them both, but especially to Jamia, because Jamia is the one that bought my book. I said, I'm really sorry to tell you, I left her a voice memo. I'm really sorry to tell you, you bought my book. I wrote the entire thing, and I have no idea what I'm trying to say. And she's like, that's normal.
Totally normal.
Totally normal. I'm like, well, don't I have to figure it out? But by the time I got through my next revision and my next revision of my next revision, then it's like, oh, now I know what I'm trying to say. So it's real, you just get it on the page and then you figure it out.
How long did you work on the book?
That's a very hard question because I thought this book was going to be a lot of different books. And so there were pieces of this book that were written 20 years ago or more. And then, but most of it was written between 2020 and 2024.
And so you had a research assistant who helped you comb through all those records.
Yes.
What other source material did you use? It's very vibrant. There's a lot of like great detail. Is that because you're a wonderful person who writes in your journal and you've collected all this stuff? You're taking notes and saying things like "don't do drugs." So like, do you have notepads? What's your process?
So one of the things that I think is really important for this book was that I was looking, when I was deciding, I wasn't only about whether to have a child, I wasn't only looking at my family history, I was looking into literature because I was looking for role models of women and people who had done parenting differently. So there's chapter 10 is a chapter called Outlaw Motherhood. And so from reading the literature, I realized that, I should also say that's one of my big questions was, I always thought not having children was a radical act. And then I realized having children could also be a radical act. And so I was reading Toni Morrison, I was reading Adrienne Rich, I was reading Barbara Ehrenreich. There's an amazing anthology called Revolutionary Mothering that I read. And in that, it's mostly talking about Black and brown and queer communities and kinship networks and all these other ways that, of course, I feel like I'm smart. I had a minor in women's studies. Like, I should have known about all of this stuff. How did I not know? And then I realized that this is part of the problem of the, I guess, white noise of the patriarchal machine, is that like the other images of like traditional motherhood are so kind of ingrained in us and it bombards us so much that it's hard to notice the other kind of, I don't know, images raising their hand, I guess.
I mean, the academic in you is very clearly present in this book. Like, this is the bibliography. It's massive. It's massive. I was stunned. I was going to ask you a question about what did you read to write, and then I was like, holy cannoli.
Oh my gosh, the copywriter was not happy with me.
Not happy with me?
Yeah, not happy at all, because they were like, this is the longest bibliography and notes section I've ever seen, and like they have to go through, they comb through every single thing to look, and they also have to make sure that if I mention it, that it's actually within the manuscript itself.
Yeah.
So they were like, what?
Fact checked within an inch of its life. It's great,
Yeah.
like any good journalist would. We're gonna open it up for questions, but before I do that, I wonder if we could have you read one more short passage about love. And and maybe comment, you can comment as people gather their questions, how your sort of understanding of love has changed. I just think this is so beautiful.
I thought of something that the psychologist Catherine Page Hardin said to me when I interviewed her. It's not because you love your child that you take care of them. It's because you take care of them that you love them. The truth was that as I nurtured Clementine, I grew to love her. It didn't happen all at once, but over minutes and hours and days and months, until I didn't notice the increments anymore. Just the overwhelming feeling I'd learned to call love. I'd always believed love was automatic, tidal, that it had to bowl me over, knock me off my feet. But now I understood love as a process of commitment. And as I committed to the mothering, the love followed. I didn't have to lose myself. Through the act of caretaking, I could find myself, and my daughter too.
Thank you.
She's somewhere.
She's somewhere around here.
Yeah.
So should we take some questions?
Yeah, if you have a question, raise your hand. I'll walk around the microphone.
Thanks so much, Ruthie. I saw you last week at Hummingbird and had to come back and see you again. I was wondering how Clementine feels about having a famous mother author and how you think it might change over time, if you have any ideas about how that might change.
Yeah. Well, at 4.5, it's hard to know. I mean, she knows. Right now, it seems like she's very excited about it. She came with me. I spoke at her preschool recently, and she was very excited because she wanted to sign people's books, and people were very nice to let her sign the books too. And of course, Clementine being a very long name, she was like Clem and oops time, and like writing it in a circle. So yeah, one of the things I want to say is that I had Rob read this book very carefully. He's a big part of the book, so obviously for himself, but also for anything that I might have a blind spot for when it came to Clementine, because maybe I'm intending something as, innocently, but it could be misconstrued, and also not just Clementine today, but Clementine a long time from now, whenever it is she might read this book. The other thing I was very careful of is all of the conversation about donor eggs, because I didn't and don't want her to think she was like a second choice in a way, if that makes sense, or that she's not like, the best thing that ever happened to me, which she is, and the most amazing thing. So I was very careful in how I wrote about that and how I talked to her about that as well. And so that's sort of like a big piece of the puzzle as well that I wanted to make sure